fire safety, electrosurgical safety, energy-based devices and tissue interaction, laser safety, and operator courses. And Rob will introduce his topic as it's on the board. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you. She said I'm Rob Scroggins. I'm from the United States. 25 years experience in the operating room. I implemented a smoke-free facility in the U.S. in northern Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati, Ohio. 55 operating rooms. We have smoke evacuators on every cautery generator. It's mandatory that they use smoke evacuation in the hospital, and surgeons and staff can be punished administratively by not using it. So we want to get where Denmark is. I've been to Denmark many times. I love your country. I love that law. So my title is Clearing the Air for Safety. I put this together for this special event. I thank EORNA for having me. It's great. It's my second EORNA conference. So why this topic and why now? You guys have been inundated for the last several hours, the last couple of days on surgical smoke plume and the hazards. Why? Why have we been getting this information? It's because it is such a hot topic, and we know so much more about surgical smoke and the hazards than we did even 10 years ago. As the previous speakers spoke about, we've known about this since the 1980s. And here we are in 2017, still EORNA is clawing and fighting this battle. There are better ways to study the contents of smoke now than there were in the past, meaning we know more about it. More OR professionals have attended educational sessions on the topic and have become better educated in the hazards of surgical smoke, and taking that information back from conferences like this back to their home hospitals and sharing that information and raising awareness. Why is surgical plume hazardous? We've heard from several speakers in the last several hours, starting in the middle of the night with Penny this morning. So there are three types of hazards in surgical smoke, and many of this has been covered, and we'll cover it again because it is good information. There's a physical hazard. This is the particulate matter that is found in surgical smoke, the small particles. There is a chemical hazard, chemicals that are contained in the surgical smoke that can cause cancer and other diseases. There's a biological component. As one of the speakers said, organic contents, bacteria, viruses, prions, and cellular contents and DNA are found in surgical smoke. What about the physical hazards? The speaker at the last keynote session was talking about the physical hazards, particulate matter in surgical smoke. These particles range in size from 0.01 microns to greater than 200 microns. Particles of the size 0.3 microns can bypass our natural mucociliary defenses and make it and precipitate in the alveoli of our lungs. They act similar to air pollution and tobacco smoke. The mechanism of action is exactly the same. 0.3 micron particles bypass our mucociliary defenses regardless if it's surgical smoke, tobacco smoke, or a fire outside. It's the particulate size that matters. What are the health concerns from this particulate matter? It can cause or exacerbate bronchiolitis, asthma, COPD and emphysema, atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries, thrombogenesis or the creation of blood clots. And this is a photomicrograph of a smoke particle captured by the cilia, captured by the mucociliary defenses in the respiratory system. This was in a pig model, but this is in a trachea. Once these particles bypass that, we have very few defenses left in our body. Small particles can be absorbed across the air-blood membrane or air-blood barrier in the lung at the alveolar level and travel throughout the bloodstream and lymphatic system in the body. Keeping in mind that these particles are laden, or contain all the chemicals that everyone has talked about that exist in surgical smoke. Subsequently, they target organs like the heart, liver, brain, colon, and other organ systems in the body and deposit there, and can cause cellular changes that lead to cancer and other diseases. Eventually, it adversely affects the function of all these organs. we go. What about chemical hazards? We heard several different chemicals mentioned. I mentioned these. These are my favorite ones. I don't know why. Chemistry class, I was a geek. But these are just there are several of 150 plus chemicals found in surgical smoke. Benzene. Benzene is a solvent. It is used in manufacturing plastics, rubber, lubricants, and other items. It is also a Class 1 carcinogen as designated by the International Agency on Cancer Research. It causes blood cancers. Hydrogen cyanide, as the other speaker spoke about over in the main hall, is used in chemical warfare. In surgical smoke, we have hydrogen cyanide as its own chemical coming from the surgical smoke. We also have another chemical known as acrylonitrile, which is found in surgical smoke, that when it contacts the moisture in the mucous membranes, it converts to hydrogen cyanide as well. So if you're going to get a dose, let's get 2, okay? Because it's better for us, right? 2 is more than 1. Toluene is paint thinner. It's one of the main uses of that. You go buy a can of paint thinner, it's generally toluene. And toluene can cause problems in the central nervous system. With a woman who is pregnant that is exposed to toluene, this toluene crosses the placental barrier, and this is a concern because it's been shown to cause attention deficit disorders in children and also central nervous system development delays. So we want to keep that in mind if you're pregnant working in the operating room or you're doing laparoscopy on a pregnant woman in the operating room, as these chemicals will absorb across the peritoneal membrane into the bloodstream as well. Formaldehyde is a preservation material used by mortuaries and laboratories. We send specimens to the lab for diagnosis. They preserve them in formaldehyde. Ethylbenzene is a chemical that is used in the manufacture of styrofoam. It makes styrene, which in turn is used to make styrofoam, to make cups and plates and disposable dishes. Perchloroethylene is dry cleaning fluid. If you go to a dry cleaner, they're required, every place that I've ever looked, to have a ventilation system. It's a closed system, so they're not breathing those fumes in. And in the operating room, we place our face in the plume of smoke containing these chemicals. And then the final one I'll talk about is carbon monoxide. It is a hazardous byproduct of combustion. Many people die every year of carbon monoxide poisoning in their home as winter approaches and people turn their furnaces on for the first time or light the fireplace for the first time in the season, and there's a stoppage in the ventilation system, and the carbon monoxide builds up in the house and kills entire families. You can't smell it, you can't see it, you can't taste it, you just die. So this is also found in surgical smoke. Some of the first symptoms you get of carbon monoxide poisoning are watery eyes, flushed skin, and a headache. And many times we leave the operating room with watery eyes, flushed skin, and a headache, and we think we're just stressed. Really, we've been poisoned by these chemicals in the surgical smoke. Live human papillomavirus, human immunodeficiency virus, and hepatitis B virus have been recovered in surgical plume. The late young lady, I forget your name, Rachel, spoke about the DNA and the viruses and things in the smoke. These have been recovered from plume. Intact cancer cells have been recovered in plume. There was a paper from the 1990s where they were doing a laparoscopic excision of a melanoma, retroperitoneal melanoma. And at the end of the procedure, the surgeon pulled the trocars out, pressed down on the abdomen to blow the smoke out of the abdomen before they closed the wounds. A few years later, the patient presented back with melanoma at all of the port sites. So there is proof positive there in one instance that it transferred melanoma from the tumor to another site in the same patient. So transfer of disease is possible and has been documented. Human papillomavirus has been associated with several cancers, as we well know. Documented cases of laryngeal papilloma and throat cancer from surgical plume and surgeons that perform laser procedures. We heard 2 speakers already talk about this. There are over 200 types of human papillomavirus. 200 types. 13 are known to cause cancer, according to the World Health Organization. And also, according to the World Health Organization, they state that potentially 80% of the population has HPV in their system at any given time. And yet, we only use a smoke evacuator when we know we're taking off a condyloma. But that leaves out the rest of that 80% of the population that we do nothing about. So much for universal precautions, right? The Canadian Standards Association is one of the first regulations and guidelines I'll talk about, and I received their permission to use this on the slide, but they have a standard called the Z305-13-13, and Penny was instrumental in working with this organization and getting this in place in Canada. Very, very, very strongly worded, well put together standard. And many other organizations, states, and legislative bodies use this standard as their guide when they're making California, for example, when they're writing their laws. So very strongly worded, very well put together. EORN, Natalie talked about the guidelines, and these are the basic outline of the guidelines. Recommendation 1, healthcare organizations should provide, I like to say have to provide, but should provide surgical smoke-free environment. The peri-op team should evacuate all smoke. The peri-op team members should receive training, ongoing training, and competency verification on surgical smoke safety. I like to see this. Most places, you have to take CPR every year. You have to have your bloodborne pathogen update every year and other requirements every year. Let's add surgical smoke safety to that requirement as well, so that we stay up to date on that. Recommendation 4, that they have a policy in place, and they revise it from time to time because things change. As I said, we know more about smoke today than we did 10 years ago. And recommendation 5, peri-op personnel should participate in quality control. So we want to do studies. How are we doing on evacuating the smoke? We came out the door, we're doing great. Everybody's using smoke evacuator, but 6 months down the road, not so much. We want to keep that in front. So we do quality assurance and make sure that we keep that program going. Denmark, here you go. The Danish Working Environment Act says that surgical smoke must be removed by evacuation device. See the difference in the wording? It must be removed by an evacuation device. It's not a choice. It must not recirculate back into the room. In Denmark, the surgical smoke, after it's evacuated from the site, has to go outside the room. It can't be returned to the room. The device must contain an alarm to notify the users if it's not functioning properly. You may think it's working, but it's not. So the device has to be able to self-diagnose to keep the workers safe. Other organizations have standards and guidelines that they've written. The International Federation of Perioperative Nurses, the International Electrotechnical Commission, the International Organization of Standardization, all have guidelines regarding surgical smoke and the development and building of surgical smoke evacuation devices. The ICSP, International Council on Surgical Plume, which Penny is the boss. I love Penny. They're One Voice Advocacy, and they're an international group. It is not associated with any organization. They're a nonprofit organization, standalone, and have 170,000 members now, Penny. So it has grown greatly in the 2 years of its existence. This is the website and information. If you want to email them, I highly recommend you take that down and jot it down or take a picture, because they have a wealth of information available and a group of experts that are ready to help you out to go smoke free. Everybody got it that wants it? 3, 2, 1. Okay. So what do we want to do? We want to implement our smoke evacuation policy. We want to do a clinical needs assessment. We don't know where to start until we know what we need. So then we want to do an equipment needs assessment. What type of procedures are we doing and what type of equipment do we need to accommodate that? Have policy and procedure templates and use those to develop your own policy procedure. There are many of them out there on the web. Staff competency documentation. As I said, annual documentation that there is training occurring. Educational materials, CEU programs, ARN toolkit, and many other online programs that are available. Reinforcement aids, posters and handouts. I made everybody so crazy with smoke evacuation when I did my program. I had posters everywhere, and I would change those posters out every couple of weeks to keep it fresh. So everybody had to see the smoke evacuation information. They had no choice but to see it. And then staff communication tools, a newsletter, etc. On your policy, it should identify who's responsible for the implementation of that policy and hold that person accountable. should have clear objectives, should be revised periodically, should have the scope plainly written. Who does it apply to and when does it apply? References and evidence. I attach electronically articles and evidence-based practice to my policy. Equipment specifications, what type of equipment do you need for that, and the operations of that equipment. As far as education, I look at this with Patricia Benner's novice to expert theory. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We're baby nurses. We're baby OR nurses in some instances when it comes to this. So we read, we learn, we become experts in surgical smoke evacuation. As nurses learn, we change our practice according to the evidence discovered through research. Many are unaware of the hazards associated with smoke, but as we learn, we can effect change. How do we change the practice? That's often a problem. We know it's bad for us. Many nurses know it's bad, but how do we make it happen? So we can use, Kurt Lewin's change theory. Decide what practice we want to change. We want to change that we're not using smoke evacuation. So how do we do that? We gather all of our stuff, like I said. We gather our information. We freeze everything in place. Let's say we're gonna do what we do now until Friday. We're gonna not use smoke evacuation until Friday. Then Friday afternoon, the end of the day, we freeze everything. It stops. We bring in the smoke evacuation, we do the training, we put it in place, and come Monday morning, we unfreeze with our new way of doing it and have everyone on board. What are the safety measures? Surgical suction. A lot of people I've talked to here and at other conferences in the last few weeks say we follow with the suction in the yank hour and capture the smoke. That's not adequate. On a good day, surgical suction or vacuum runs at about 85 liters per minute. That's not enough velocity to capture all the particulate, the gases, and material that are in the surgical smoke. Compared to a surgical smoke plume evacuator with flow rates up to and exceeding 839 liters per minute. So we have to have that capture velocity to get these gases and vapors. A little video you guys can watch. This was done in our lab, and it shows using a cautery pencil without smoke evacuation. And we can see the plume rising up, and then the heat, the convection currents carrying the smoke up higher into the breathing zone. And then in a second, it's going to stop, and we're going to put in smoke evacuation. So you see the difference of capturing that smoke at the source, that it's not reaching our breathing zone. You still see the heat rising, but the vacuum is enough to capture the particulate matter in the smoke and bring it up into the pencil. We'll switch off in just a second to an open tubing. And you can see the convection currents changing the waves in the air above, pulling the heat into it as it pulls the smoke up from the bottom, from the cautery pencil. This was a very neat photographic effect in order to show the capture of the surgical smoke and the difference with and without evacuation. What about laparoscopic smoke? We talked just briefly about that. All the chemicals and all the particulate matter that we have in open procedures that we breathe in, during laparoscopy we are exposing our patients to. So smoke in laparoscopic procedures can have health effects on the patient. In the case of a pregnant woman undergoing laparoscopy, the smoke can impact the fetus as well, so we want to keep that in mind. The use of laparoscopic plume removable devices is required to protect both the staff and the patient. It doesn't do us any good if we open the trocar valves and let the smoke out into the room for us to breathe. So we want to protect our patient as well as ourselves, so you want to evacuate that smoke laparoscopically during the procedure. So, in conclusion, the facts are very clear. Surgical smoke plume is a physical, biological, and chemical hazard, and there are ways to mitigate these hazards. Best practices include local exhaust ventilation or smoke evacuator, the use of 0.1 micron N95 surgical respirators, universal precautions, a strong policy, and the most important thing is education. Because once we know the facts, we as nurses know how to effect that change. And once surgeons know the fact, remember, surgeons are scientists. Let's give them the evidence, show them the evidence-based research articles that are out there, and they will take that information and really have no choice but to change their practice as well. So don't allow surgical equipment in your operating room. Change your practice and improve your health. Remember, there's more than one terrific reason to be safe at work. And the bibliography of references, if anyone would like to see that, I have 2 pages of them. So.